I'm certainly overdue for this one. As a lot of you guys probably know, Sonic the Hedgehog is my favorite video game franchise ever. If you need any confirmation of that, I'd estimate about 20% of my channel's content is related to the blue blur. However, I'll be the first to admit that being a fan of this franchise means taking the good with the bad, and the ugly in some cases. The first game in Digital Sumo Sonic Racing series released during one of those low points in the franchise. Sonic 06 was still fresh in a lot of people's minds, and in the following year, Sega would continue to fail again, and again, and again with the franchise. So when Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing was first announced, people were either indifferent to it or outright loathed it. However, people were pleasantly surprised when the game came out, as it was actually pretty good. Though it was derivative of Mario Kart and clearly made on the cheap, the gameplay was solid, the track design was imaginative, and there was plenty of great content. Its biggest issue was that despite being called Sonic and Sega All-Star Racing, it leaned a little too heavily into the Sonic franchise, something that they addressed with the follow-up Sonic and All-Star Racing Transformed. More so than that, they effectively built on the gameplay of the first game, with transforming vehicles, dynamically changing tracks, and a great single-player mode in addition to the excellent multiplayer. Seriously, Transformed is one of my favorite racing games ever, and I openly regard it as one of the best games in the whole franchise, which is why I was pretty bummed when Team Sonic Racing came out. Now, that's not to say that Team Sonic Racing was bad. The presentation and controls were polished, and the team mechanics were original. However, it was one step forward, two steps back, with the game removing the transforming vehicles, dynamically changing tracks, and providing a single-player mode that was less than stellar, not to mention the fact that you really needed friends to get the most out of it. Fast forward to the year 2025, and we find ourselves in yet another low point in the Sonic franchise, as Sega's recent output has left something to be desired. Sonic Superstars was forgettable, Sonic Frontiers was soulless and misguided, and Sonic at Shadow Generations was good, but it was sort of frustrating. Mostly because it exposed how full of crap Sonic Team is. Didn't they say the reason they did Sonic Frontiers was because they felt they had tapped out the boost gameplay?
Give your balls a tug, you tit fucker!
Needless to say, I wasn't terribly excited when Sega announced Sonic Racing Crossworlds, especially when I heard that rather than the game being handled by Digital Sumo, it would instead be handled by Sonic Team. It also didn't help that the game just didn't impress at all. I didn't understand what the world swapping would bring to the table gameplay-wise, and all the weird DLC felt very corporate to me. Even when IGN rated the game higher than Mario Kart World, I had my doubts as to whether or not Sonic Racing Crossworlds was really that good. So I finally taken the time to play it, and no, it's not. It's fine, but it's not that great to begin with. There isn't any story to talk about here. Don Pa is holding another Grand Prix, and Sonic and company are all down to race. The little plot is here is contest, and considering the plot was more of a hindrance than Team Sonic Racing, I'm happy that they got rid of it. Games like this don't really need plots anyway, and will make for a shorter video, so let's move on. I have mixed opinions on the presentation here. On a technical level, the game is great. It's important to note that I opted for the Switch 2 version of the game. I got the Switch game on sale for Black Friday before the Switch 2 version came out, and when it did, they sold the upgrade pack for $5, so I only paid $50 for a game that should have cost $90, and I'm happy with the performance on Switch 2. The game runs at 60 FPS at a crisp picture quality, which is all I asked for. I don't need the game to run at 120 FPS. That being said, I'm not fond of the overall art style. I don't know, there's just something overdone about the whole thing with an overabundance of color and lack of cohesion. It also doesn't help that the general appeal of the game is a little lacking. Most of the time, I only remember the levels in the game because they happen to be based on classic Sonic stages, and when they aren't, I'll be damned if I can recall any of them. It just kinda comes off as Sonic Team relying on nostalgia like they always do, and trying a little too hard to achieve that. It lacks the concise creativity that defined Digital Sumo's work on the franchise. The same can be said for the sound design too. The sound effects in general are pretty weak, lacking the oomph of other racing games. The music is overproduced as all hell. I can hear parts of classic tunes here and there, but most of the time it's drowned out by a lot of excess instrumentation and the sounds of racing. And it's nice to see that Sega isn't putting much effort into the voice acting either. Though vets like Roger Craig Smith and Jack Pollock do their usual best, most of the characters sound pretty bad, especially the ones who haven't had speaking lines in a while. Seriously, Jet sounds even more annoying than he did in Sonic Riders.
What are you screaming about? Just get out of the way of me and my victory!
Some of the characters aren't even voiced at all, which I can confirm was so Sega could save some money. Then again, that does make sense considering it is Sega. These guys don't have that Nintendo money to burn through. The game might run well, but the presentation is just a little too busy for my taste. Sega really needs to get some better artists on staff. Who they got just aren't cutting it anymore. So how's the gameplay? I mean, in this case, that's what matters most, right? Well, it is for the most part okay. The game is a kart racer, very much in the vein of Mario Kart. You race 3 times around a track, doing your best to place as high as you can, while also using items to either get ahead or hinder other racers. New to the series is the Crossworlds system, which sees you passing through a portal on the second lap that teleports you to another track. This also comes into play during the final race of whatever cup you're in. You actually only race across 3 tracks and then do 1 lap piece for each track for the final race. It sounds kinda cool on paper, but in practice, I don't get it. I feel like the idea is that swapping to another track mixes up the experience of each race, but that honestly isn't the effect that is achieved. It's honestly kind of a gimmick, really. It's also not that technically impressive either, considering there's some obvious loading going on here. You hit a straightaway, the portal opens, you pass through it, and then the track loads. It's not like Ratchet & Clank or Rift Apart where the transition is seamless. One thing I will give the game credit for is that it does return to some mechanics from Transformed and even Sonic Riders. In addition to cars, you have the option to race on extreme gear, and at points during the race, you'll switch to either a boat or jet, which mixes up how you have to race. And it is window dressing of the worst kind. Though you might be racing on extreme gear, it doesn't really make the game play like Sonic Riders, and it feels a little awkward due to the fact that you still feel like you're driving a car. Kinda like how it felt to control Opa Opa in All-Star Racing. Even Transforming is a little lame, mostly because they don't really do anything all that creative with it. In Transform, the transformation served as a means to allow the developers to get more creative with the level design. In Crossworlds, it just feels like, here's a water section, or here's a flying section. Not much else outside of that. Really, the level design here is the most disappointing aspect of the gameplay. Again, I remember the themes here, well, at least the ones that were based off of Sonic stages, but I can't for the life of me remember the tracks themselves. And I played this game from the easiest difficulty all the way up to the highest difficulty, so I raced on all the tracks multiple times, even more so than normal due to the Crossworlds system. Yet I cannot remember anything about any of them. Going back to All-Star Racing, I remember every single track, and that goes beyond the stellar theming. It also had to do with the track design and layout too. In Transform, they took it to another level with the dynamically changing tracks, which made every race feel like an adventure. Take the Panzer Dragoon stage for instance. For the first 2 laps you're racing across bridges and waterways, but on the last lap a monster takes out the track, forcing you to take to the air and race to the canyon. Was it scripted and predictable? Yes, but it was memorable as all hell. There isn't a single track in Crossworlds that demonstrates the same level of creativity. A lot of people were saying that Crossworlds was taking shots at Mario Kart World and its boring open world, but honestly, Mario Kart World succeeds because of its interconnected map. Is there much to do in free roam? Not really, but the game makes use of it in other ways. Having to race from one track to the other essentially multiplied the amount of potential tracks you had to race on due to all the different combination of routes, and the rally races were just a stroke of genius. The open world was more than just a gimmick, whereas the whole Crossworlds thing very much is. But what would have been cooler is if they took the dynamically changing tracks to the next level, in that each level had a variety of scenarios as to what could happen, which would not only increase the potential track layouts, but make for more inventive use of theming. It would also keep players on their toes in a manner they were hoping the Crossworlds mechanic would achieve. As for the general gameplay, man, don't get me wrong, it's fine. It's tight enough, but I don't know. There's something off about the control here. It's important to note that I was replaying Sonic and All-Star Racing for a showcase as I was recording footage, and the feel of the racing and drifting was still satisfying as ever. And it was more satisfying than Crossworlds. I don't know, it just doesn't feel as tight, and the sense of speed was never as strong either. I also feel like they screwed up the items as well. It feels like just about all of them lock onto the player in some form or fashion, and what counters them appears to be inconsistent. Granted, the items weren't that great in All-Star Racing either, but they were far less obnoxious, and by Transform, they have balanced them out rather nicely. I felt like I was getting robbed of my victory far less here than in Mario Kart. Here, I felt like I was getting robbed way more often than not.
I'm up against you? How is this even fair? How am I supposed to race the fastest thing alive? It's fair because I'm not running. Relax.
At the very least, there is a decent sense of progression. As you race and defeat rivals, you will gain XP and eventually you'll upgrade to a better license. The better the license you have, the more stat buffs you can equip, which will do things like give you a performance boost for certain stats, or have items at the start of the race. It adds to the game's customizable system as well, which allows you to piece together various parts to build your own racer. That's a cool idea, but I feel like they could have taken it a step further, maybe be able to customize how your vehicle transforms as well. Still missing the mission mode from Transform though. I will never understand why they decided to remove that. I've been mostly negative, but I want to stress, Cross Racing isn't exactly a bad game. This is a perfectly serviceable kart racer, but it doesn't really excel in the same way its predecessors or its contemporaries do. The difficulty in Crossworlds is weird. At first, I thought it depended on the speed you select, like in Mario Kart, but instead the difficulty is dependent on the level of your rival. And increasing the level doesn't really make the game tougher in the traditional sense, it just makes things more obnoxious. Other racers seem to get a performance boost and you get destroyed by items so frequently. But the thing is, you can adjust the level of your rival, independent of the speed. Yeah, racing on the highest difficulty will net you more tickets, which you can spend on new parts and upgrades, but it's just not worth the frustration. I mean, it's common to get annihilated by items in Mario Kart, but it still feels balanced, stuff like the blue shell notwithstanding. And even then, there is counters to that. And I think the developers realized that because they put in the option to retry individual races by spending tickets. And if you're in a position where you would need to do that, odds are you have plenty of tickets. Odds are you'll place as high as you need to long before you run out of tickets. It just comes off as a band-aid fix to me. Crossworlds does have a decent amount of content. There are lots of tracks, lots of vehicles to build, and lots of characters to play as. In fact, Sega is still adding to it. Since launch, they've added a few characters from Yakuza and Persona 5, which is neat, but even cooler, they are adding Tangle and Whisper. These are two of my favorite characters from the IDW comics, and their inclusion here makes me hopeful that they will appear in later games. I mean, if they can get Ian Flynn to write the character interactions and get two original characters from the comics here, I see no reason why they couldn't become regulars in the series. Maybe then they'll let Ian Flynn write the stories of the games as opposed to just the dialogue. Please?
You serious?
Yeah, I thought not. There are also some paid DLC available, but who in their right mind would pay to add SpongeBob-themed content to a Sonic game? Speaking of price, I know at the top I said I avoided paying $90 for the game, but upon doing some research, I found that the Switch 2 version is commanding that kind of money. In fact, I'm finding most Switch 2 games are being listed at $70 right now. I'm not sure why that's happening considering...
Hey, relax, guys!
But I'm not complaining. That being said, $70 is a lot to ask for this game. Prices for the PS5 and Xbox Series games are already dropping, so I'd say pick those up if you have the option. Or you could just wait for a sale on Steam. In fact, that's probably what I'd recommend. So yeah, Sonic Racing Crossworlds didn't really impress me. Again, the game is fine. This is a perfectly serviceable kart racer, but in that regard, it's very middle of the road. It's by no means bad, but it is a long way off from exceptional. I know a lot of people are probably going to complain and compare the game so much to All-Star Racing and Transform, but I can't help it. Those games are just so much better. And cheaper. You can get both on Steam for half of what you would pay for Crossworlds. But here's the thing, if I don't compare Crossworlds to All-Star Racing or Transform, then I'm going to compare it to Mario Kart World. And Mario Kart World is the better game by a country mile, even with its inflated price tag and current lack of DLC. Granted, if you don't have a Switch 2, then I guess Crossworlds is worth picking up. Wait, you can also play Transform on a series console. Guess I'd only recommend it to PS5 owners who happen to be Sonic fans. Well, that's about all I have to say about this one, though I'm glad I didn't have to do a super negative review of this game. It's still not something I see myself ever playing again. Sonic Racing Crossworlds might not be bringing up the rear, but certainly not taking the checkered flag anytime soon.